Okay, good evening, everyone. Let's start with cultivating our motivation. Two days ago, the New York Times ran a story titled "Thousands Flee Parts of Aleppo, Syria," as Assad's forces gain ground. The photo accompanying the first page of the story shows hundreds of Syrian families waiting to board buses for government-controlled western Aleppo. You should Google the story. The looks on the faces of these people are depictions of fear and desperation. The urgency is a response to the ferocious ground assault and aerial bombardment in eastern Aleppo, forcing some 16,000 people to flee for their lives this past Monday. Forces loyal to President Assad captured about a third of the territory in Aleppo that had been held by rebels. Planes have dropped leaflets over the rebel-held areas in the eastern part of the city saying, "If you don't leave these areas quickly, you'll be annihilated." The leaflets warn, "Save yourselves. You know that everyone's left you alone to face your doom and have offered you no help." The World Food Programme said it was able to supply bread and other rations to community kitchens in western Aleppo. But residents in the eastern parts of the city have had no food distribution for 2 weeks. "It's really dire," said a spokeswoman for the agency, citing accounts of residents sifting through garbage for something to eat. "It's a slow-motion descent into hell," she said. So for those of us here tonight who are going to listen to the teachings in relation to the quizzes, we're obviously not experiencing this level of suffering, not even close. And yet, if all of us reflect on the different mental states that have arisen for each one of us in the past 72 hours, we've all fallen prey to a great number of negative mental states. It might be irritation, criticizing others, frustration about not getting our way, people aren't following our directions, on and on. The self-centered thinking takes over and wins again and again. And so when we compare our experience to the scenario described a few moments ago, I'll speak for myself. It elicits healthy embarrassment and heartfelt regret for the lack of fortitude and concern for others. So we need to confront the self-centered thoughts and banish them from our mind when they arise, and instead use this precious time that we have to engage in activities that benefit others and support the cultivation of compassion and wisdom. And also we need to have compassion for ourselves when we do fall prey to the afflictions that we've created the karma to experience. So let's engage with the material tonight in a manner that helps our understanding to grow, to help each other understand this, and give fuel to the aspiration to become fully awakened so that we can truly be of benefit to all. So here's how I thought we would do this tonight. There's a lot of material. We can sort of rejoice in hearing the material again through the voice of our teacher of animal children, and I also have some other teachers that I can read from tonight. So I will present what I've got so far, and then if you want to debate with this material, please do. If I've got it totally wrong, please start waving your hand wildly. Please do that. And then if you've got something else to say that's very beneficial, or not, just raise your hand anyway. So, question 20. How do higher rebirth and the highest good relate to each other? So I'm going to start off with what it says in the commentary, the Precious Garland, first of all. And actually, the answer to this question is probably the entire 500 verses. So we could talk about the 500 verses for the next 3 weeks, but we'd only get finished not even one question. So I'm going to give you a summary of what this is about, and you can help me out. So the principal theme of Precious Garland is the method to attain upper rebirth, as well as the highest good of liberation and full awakening. And this is, of course, reflected in the Lama Rim's division of practitioners into 3 capacities. The goal of a person of initial capacity is to have a good rebirth. Okay, I better not do everything as a call and response here. Yes. So, yes, is to avoid an unfortunate rebirth and take an upper rebirth. Liberation, one aspect of highest good, is the aim of practitioners of middle capacity, and full awakening is the other aspect of highest good. And that's the goal of practitioners of advanced capacity. So the Precious Garland explains that upper rebirth is a stepping stone to liberation and awakening, and it's not an end in itself. Upper rebirth refers not to just rebirth as a human or God, but to a human or God rebirth in which we're able to learn and practice the Dharma. Highest good is liberation from cyclic existence and the full awakening of a Buddha. So actually the first and second chapters of this whole teaching are dedicated specifically to explaining the causes for upper rebirth, such as ethical conduct. What are other causes of upper rebirth? Generosity, the dedication of merit, making pure prayers. And the causes for the highest good is the wisdom, realizing emptiness. So the subject matter of this whole book is upper rebirth and the highest good, together with their causes and effects. In other words, this whole text teaches us how to improve our mind in the present so that we will attain an upper rebirth, a fortunate rebirth, in the future. And then on the basis of that good rebirth, we can continue to improve our minds over a series of good rebirths until we attain the ultimate goal, which is the highest good of Buddhahood. So Nagarjuna identifies upper rebirth and highest good as the effects, and then he gives us a brief overview of the main and secondary causes for each. So if we take a look at verse 3, for example, it says this: that vessel first practices the Dharma of upper rebirth. Afterwards comes the highest good, because having obtained upper rebirth, one proceeds in stages to the highest good. So Nagarjuna goes on to explain that the 2 factors of upper rebirth and highest good must be practiced in order. First, we learn the 16 causal practices to attain an upper rebirth, and after practicing those well in future lives, we'll attain upper rebirth. By generating, I missed one part here. After practicing those well in future lives, we will attain upper rebirth. And then we receive an explanation of the final aim of the path, the highest good, and its causal practice, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. By generating this wisdom and familiarizing ourselves with it over time, over and over and over again, then we will attain the highest good. So why do you think these 2 come in this order? Well, because it's very difficult to attain highest good in just one life of an upper rebirth. A series of upper rebirths is needed to do all the purification and accumulation of merit and hearing and thinking and meditating necessary to attain liberation or awakening. Okay. So then he goes on to say this: First, we receive explanations on the easier topics. Impermanence, well, that's a lot easier. Refuge, karma and its effects, the 10 non-virtuous paths of action, the 10 virtuous ones, and so on. And when we gradually mature and become a suitable vessel, we hear the teachings on the more difficult topics such as emptiness. And in this way, our mind develops and we can accomplish the causes of liberation. Another reason that the instructions must be practiced in this order is to prevent the chance of people like us misunderstanding the advanced instructions if they hear them without suitable preparation. For example, we may think that emptiness means total non-existence, and thereby will disparage the law of cause and effect, and this would lead to us creating great destructive karma, resulting in lower rebirths. Obviously, if we get stuck in a lower rebirth, we're kind of hooped for a long time. And then if we meditate on an incorrect understanding of emptiness, there's no way of attaining the highest good. If we misunderstand karma and its effects and practice incorrectly, it's also impossible to attain liberation. So we must proceed by observing karma and its effects, such that our understanding of it doesn't harm our understanding of emptiness, and such that our meditation on emptiness doesn't harm our understanding of karma and its effects. Now, does anyone want to venture why or how it could happen that our meditation on emptiness, if we don't do it right, would harm our understanding of karma and effects?
For example, if we are having a tendency to nihilism.
Okay, you know what? I think you need the mic.
If you have a tendency for nihilism, you have been engaged in existence totally, then we might just do all kinds of actions that create a lot of negative karma.
Hmm? Are people hearing that, Stephen? Okay, we'll just keep going and hope they are. And then he goes on to say, if we understand correctly these two, we'll see that they don't contradict each other, but in fact complement each other. And then our path to the highest good will progress well. So then he goes on and says, in short, the order of practice is to first practice the causes of upper rebirth and attain more rebirths of upper rebirth. Based on a birth of upper rebirth, we practice the causes for the highest good, and then we attain the highest good. Okay. And then actually, Geshe Khenche Jampa Tegchog puts in a different kind of understanding here, and he says this: however, in terms of ascertaining upper rebirth and highest good with valid cognizers, the order is reversed. Upper rebirth and its causes are more difficult to ascertain than highest good and its causes. So in brief, the order of realizing by valid cognition that liberation and full awakening are highest good and our highest good and rebirth as a human being or God is upper rebirth, is first to realize highest good and then upper rebirth. And that's because realizing highest good is easier. Now, why would you think that is? For a valid cognizer, why is realizing highest good easier? Because it's a slightly obscure phenomena that can be realized by inference by power of the fact, which is using logical reasonings. And realizing upper rebirth is more difficult because it's an extremely obscure phenomena that's realized only by depending on authoritative scripture that is pure with respect to the three analysis. So that means we have to rely on scripture. It's not just sufficient merely to value scriptures highly, but the scripture has to be established as valid through a great deal of analysis. So then we go back to the order of attainment, though, is the other way around. First, we practice the causes for upper rebirth and attain upper rebirth. Then, on the basis of an upper rebirth, we practice the causes of a highest good, and we attain the highest good. So then we'll continue. You can ask it, and then I'll get Venerable Sipple to answer it. Yes, please.
So would that mean that as we're trying to cultivate causes for both, what we are more likely to do is develop conviction in the highest good and confidence and faith in that, and then on the basis of that, we would actually then strive to understand upper rebirth, or to have faith or belief, conviction that upper rebirth is like possible, or what is he saying there?
Well, I'm actually puzzling on it myself.
I think the key is in the term ascertainment. You know,
So,
it's interesting to ask,
Mhm.
to think about how would you ascertain upper rebirth? How would you realize it? You know, and if you're to develop inference by power of the fact, if you have already developed strong faith in the Buddha as being a valid source, and how do you do that? By realizing that the Buddha's teachings are valid. You know, you can do that very thoroughly by realizing emptiness first. That would be my guess. You realize emptiness, you realize the valid is the Buddha is a valid being, and then based on that, you realize that other things that he said, like the fact that, you know, about upper rebirth and how you attain upper rebirth. And I don't know, if you think about what would you realize when you realize upper rebirth, it's a little bit tricky. It's a bit like asking, how do you realize renunciation? How do you
Yeah.
ascertain it?
yeah.
And I've heard this question asked many times. How do you, when on the path do you ascertain something like renunciation? And there's never a really clear answer. But within realizing emptiness, we're beginning to understand how one would realize that. So I think it has to do with ascertainment.
The ascertainment. That's what I thought too. Yeah, thank you. Is that being heard, Stephen? Okay. So with this mic, you have to have it really close. Okay, thank you.
So is that mean that what's about the upper rebirth, what is highly obscured is the workings of karma, to say that
Right.
these causes really
Right.
lead to this result?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Nagarjuna goes on to talk more about a next aspect of this. So when we look at verse 4, lines C and D of verse 4, in brief, the method for attaining them, upper rebirth and highest good, is summarized as two words that we talked about a lot in chapter 1. The first word starts with F.
Faith.
Yes, faith. And second word? Wisdom. So faith and wisdom. So these two lines respond to the question, what are the causes of upper rebirth and highest good? The reply is, in brief, they are faith and wisdom. Although there are many causes for upper rebirth, faith is the fundamental one. Similarly, while many causes are needed to attain highest good, wisdom is principal. So faith refers to belief or confidence in the law of karma and its results, the four truths of the Aryas, three jewels, and so on. We start with generating belief in these points of instruction, and that faith will lead us to put the instructions into practice. And then we go on to verse 5. Because one has faith, one partakes of the Dharma. Because one has wisdom, one truly understands. Of these two, wisdom is the foremost. But faith must come first. So due to having faith in the law of karma and its effects, people will engage in the practice of the 10 virtues, which are the cause for upper rebirth. When they have sharp faculties, they are suitable for realizing emptiness. They'll hear the teachings on emptiness and be able to develop the wisdom that realizes the ultimate mode of existence of all persons and phenomena, the wisdom that leads to highest good. Of those two causes, faith and the wisdom realizing emptiness, which do you think is the principal one? Of those two causes, highest good and high rebirth. The wisdom realizing emptiness is principal. because this wisdom is what actually liberates us from cyclic existence. It eradicates self-grasping ignorance from our mind stream in a way that it can never reappear again. So then Nagarjuna goes on to speak more in depth about upper rebirth and its causes, emphasizing the 16 practices that bring upper rebirth. Now you'll know these for sure, and I'll give you hints too. So of these 10, the first 10 are abandoning the 10 non-virtuous paths of actions. So let's call them out. Remember, we've rehearsed this so many times in the past. Killing, stealing, unwise sexual behavior, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, idle talk, and then the mental ones, coveting, maliciousness, wrong views. Okay. So, we have to abandon those, and then there's 3 others that are called blameworthy actions that we have to abandon. I'll give you a hint. Not taking intoxicants,
Not using wrong livelihoods.
maintaining a proper livelihood,
Not respecting the wise.
that
That's the one of the
abandoning harm. Then, in addition to those 13 to abandon, there are 3 to engage in. You got one of them?
respecting the wise.
Yes.
Cultivating love.
Respecting the wise, honoring the worthy, cultivating love, generosity. Yeah. Okay. So highest good is liberation and full awakening, our noble spiritual goals. To attain them, the wisdom directly and non-conceptually realizing the ultimate nature, the ultimate mode of existence of all persons and phenomena, their emptiness of inherent existence is essential. This wisdom is developed gradually, first by hearing and studying the teachings, then by contemplating and reflecting on them so we understand them correctly, and finally by integrating them in our mind through meditation. Okay, so that first question took us about 20 minutes. I think we're going to crank up the speed here because I see the lids are already starting to lower on some people here. All right, we're going to start quiz 5. So this is question 1. What is the difference between emptiness of inherent existence and total non-existence? So I'm going to go right to Khencher Jampa Tegchog, first of all, an insight into emptiness, because he has just beautiful ways of articulating this as it's articulated in Precious Garland, but it just helps my mind so much to hear it in different ways over and over and over again. So he says this: previously I warned that misunderstanding the meaning of emptiness and selflessness can be dangerous. For example, if we think that since we can't find the person when we search for it in its basis of designation, the person doesn't exist at all. So then we fall to the extreme of nihilism. Thinking that the person is totally non-existent because she can't be found under analysis is incorrect. In that case, we think emptiness means that nothing exists. So if that's so, then karma and its results don't exist, the 3 jewels don't exist, nothing exists. This is so dangerous, he says. So he says, please be careful and don't misunderstand emptiness to mean total non-existence. Things exist and function on the level of appearances. It's only when we analyze to try to find what exactly the name of the object refers to that it eludes us. And then on another section of the same book, Insight into Emptiness, Geshe Tegchog says this: sometimes we'll find a scriptural passage that says this: meditate on total non-existence. What this refers to is the total non-existence of the object of negation, true existence. That is, we should meditate on the total emptiness of true existence. So don't understand such passages to mean meditate that nothing at all exists. Emptiness never means the total non-existence of conventional things, because for emptiness to exist, there must always be an existent object that's empty. For the emptiness of the I to exist, there must be a conventionally existent I that is empty of true existence. So now I'm going to go to Precious Garland. And you might have found some other passages too. So if you've got something in a moment, please raise your hand. So to address this, I looked at verse 26 in Precious Garland. And it reads like this: I am not, I will not be, I have not, I will not have. Stated thus, the teaching of selflessness terrifies the childish. So the naive become afraid when they hear about emptiness, that there is no self. Because when they hear that the self is to be negated, they misunderstand it to mean that the conventionally existing self does not exist. So when they hear that the person is not found when searched for in the basis of designation, the physical and mental aggregates that constitute the person, they think that the person does not exist at all, and of course that's terrifying. Similarly, the aggregates are instances of mine, as in I and mine. We say I have a body, we say my mind. And when the unlearned hear that the aggregates also are not found when searched for in their basis of designation, the collection of their parts, they mistakenly think that the aggregates also don't exist. That's terrifying too. When the teachings say that the person and phenomena do not exist in the way they appear, the naive again think, well, if that's the case, then the person and phenomena, which here refers to the aggregates of body and mind, don't exist at all. They think, well, if I and mine are non-existent in the present, they will not exist in future lives either, and after death there's nothingness. They come to the wrong conclusion that the continuum of I and mine is cut, that there are no person and no aggregates after death. At this they become afraid and fall into the extremes of nihilism, non-existence, annihilation, and permanence. In brief, they think, I am not existing in the present, so I will not be existent in future. Since I have not, meaning I don't have a body and mind now, then I will not have them in future lives either. The childish are frightened when thinking thus, lacking in merit, wisdom, and intelligence. When they hear teachings on the meaning of emptiness, they think that everything becomes non-existent, that the self that meditates on selflessness, the self that realizes selflessness, the self that attains liberation, all of these become non-existent, and in this way they become afraid. So did anyone else have something that addresses this question? Okay, Venerable Sepul.
Being a rather lazy student, I was thinking that the answer would come in the section that, it was going in order. So that's where I looked. I didn't look at the whole text. I admire your scholarlyship that you went back to verse 26. I thought he was referring to she was asking about verse 104 and 105, where it's talking, the heading is absence of inherent existence, of existence and non-existence. And in that section, from Precious Garland, it says that in saying that objects of the six consciousnesses are neither true nor false, the Buddha negates the two extremes. Here, true means truly existent, false means totally non-existent. Sight, sounds, and so forth are not truly existent, but neither are they totally non-existent. So saying that they are not true refutes the extreme of absolutism, and saying that they are not false eliminates the extreme of nihilism. Anybody else?
I just wanted to point out with verse 26 about the fear is that realizing emptiness doesn't change things. It doesn't make things empty.
Right.
So there's no reason to be afraid of understanding how things really are, because we're not going to change them by understanding how they are. They already are that way.
And I think you have to have teachings for a while to arrive at that conclusion. Yeah. Okay, shall we move on? If you think of something, you can just start waving at me.
Can I just ask
Mm-hmm.
also just to think about this in very simple terms too, like what's the difference? How would you use your just everyday language to describe the difference of emptiness of inherent existence and total non-existence? Just so we cover that in our own words as well.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to address that?
No.
Guess we're not getting any takers right now. Well, total non-existence is just that. It doesn't exist. Some people think that emptiness means total non-existence, while others think that emptiness of inherent existence is an actual emptiness. So in this way, they too abandon emptiness.
I think.
So you have to get it really right in front of your mouth.
Something in simple words I always come back to is to retranslate it as the difference between emptiness of independent existence and total non-existence. And as soon in my own mind, as soon as I say independent existence, then I've affirmed existence of some sort. Whereas total non-existence really is total non-existence, but dependent existence still allows for something to be there, just not in the way that I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. All right, question 2. What is the difference between existence and inherent existence? This question drove me nuts for more than a week. I'm not even sure it's even worth going into why, because it seems like a no-brainer, but
I know, it would be great to hear why.
you want to know why?
Yeah.
Well, when I first was looking through the text to find out, is this a trick question, Venerable Children? Because it looks like a trick question. So I'll tell you where I got going down the garden path. So I looked at verse 123 in Precious Garland. So I thought, this is a trick question, and I get it now. So verse 123 says, therefore do not deny this dharma and abandon nihilistic views. In order to obtain all aims, strive for perfect understanding. So here it says this, the view of existence is the view of absolutism. The view of non-existence is the view of nihilism. Having abandoned these extreme two, and seeing the importance of the correct view in order to fully accomplish the welfare of yourself and others, exert yourself in the middle way, that is free of the two extremes. Learning how to think about emptiness properly, exert yourself to realize emptiness, to know the ultimate mode of existence. So I thought, they're the same. But actually, that's not what's being talked about here. So I just drove myself crazy. Okay.
Why? Because? I mean, what did you conclude?
Well, inherent existence so I'll tell you my conclusion, but I have to read this.
Okay.
So first of all, I'll give you a definition of inherent existence. It's a false and non-existent quality that we project onto all persons and phenomena, existence independent of causes and conditions, parts, or the mind conceiving and labeling a phenomena. Right? So that's what inherent existence is. So inherent existence is something that doesn't exist. But objects appear to us to be inherently existent. And that inherently existing means exist from their own side without depending on any other factors. So when we negate inherent existence, we are not negating all existence. Inherent existence does not equal existence. So there it is. In the same way, emptiness or emptiness of inherent existence does not equal non-existence. So when we're negating inherent existence, we aren't saying things are non-existent. And so then I got this section from one of Venerable Children's teachings. I think it was maybe even in a Green Tara retreat. So then she goes on to talk about, so that's how things aren't, but how are things? So what is existence? So then she goes on to talk about dependent arising. So dependent arising not only negates inherent existence, but it also establishes conventional existence. It does both things at the same time. Now, how does that do that? Because if things are dependently arising, then they exist. Because arising dependently means things come together and they influence each other and they form something new, so they exist. And so that is establishing that things exist. By saying that they're dependently arising, it's establishing they are not independently arising, and thus they are not inherently existent. So it's very helpful for us to reflect on how things are dependent, and then take that to say, well, if they're dependent, then they're not inherently existent, but they do exist. And then, let's see. Okay. Well then, if you take a look at the commentary to verse 80 in Precious Garland, do people go there for this answer?
That's where I just was hanging.
For most of this? Do you want to have a fly at it?
No, go ahead.
You don't? Okay. All right. So this is a portion of it. The world does not exist in the way it appears to ignorance, nor does it exist in the way ignorance apprehends it. Still, it's not non-existent. When we realize that the object of self-grasping does not exist in the way that self-grasping superimposes, we realize that the person, the aggregates, or whatever object we analyze does not inherently exist. However, this realization doesn't mean they're totally non-existent. After realizing that the conceived object of self-grasping ignorance is non-existent, we must realize that the object exists by mere name, mere label, mere designation, by conception. In short, it exists nominally. And then it goes on and on and on in that tone. And then don't ever underestimate what's in Guy Newland's book, Introduction to Emptiness. This is a beautiful book. And people think, Introduction to Emptiness? Please. I know about it. I know a bit more than that. It's a beautifully written book. So then he goes on to talk about, well, how do things exist? And then he beautifully sums up the criteria for how things exist. And he says it like this. Madhyamaka philosophers have been able to make conventional distinctions and to explain how the world works at the conventional level while using reason to refute even the conventional existence of constructs such as a creator God. Tsongkhapa's great treatise lays out 3 criteria for saying that something exists conventionally. Now we should know this because we just went through this with Venerable Children. Number 1, a conventional consciousness knows about it. Number 2, no other conventional valid cognition
Refutes it.
right, contradicts it. And number 3, right. So, since nothing exists ultimately, whatever fails to meet these criteria for existing conventionally does not exist at all. Then I've got a whole bunch more stuff. And we're only on question 2. Well, are you okay?
Yeah.
All right. Would anyone else like to add anything to question 2? I've got a whole bunch of stuff, but in the light of time, I think we'll just move on. Yeah? Okay.
It's good to check if everybody gets it.
Would everyone indicate if you've got it? Well, if you don't get it yet, I'm pointing you to these texts where you can, you can review this and take time chewing on it. Here's one last section from Guy's book that will really make it very accessible about existence. So he says this: Tsongkhapa accepts the conventional validity of cars and tables and people that appear as objects of ordinary, healthy consciousnesses, minds that have not been fooled or distorted by factors such as disease, optical illusion, bad philosophy, and so forth. He argues, as we have seen, that all reasoned analysis can and must proceed from this basic set of accurate and reliable data, even though our senses mistakenly present images of cars and tables that appear as though they were objectively, independently, and essentially real. They do allow us to accurately distinguish between a car and a table. With further analysis at the conventional level, we can even learn which tables to sit on and which cars, if any, are good to drive. Well, he talks about sitting on the table and then it was breaking. Okay, we're going to move on to question 3. Explain how and why ignorance is the root of cyclic existence and why eradicating it overcomes cyclic existence. So here's how I thought I'd do this one. I have a number of things from different authors first, and I'm going to ask you to tell me, does it answer how ignorance is the root of cyclic existence? Does it answer why ignorance is the root of cyclic existence? Or does it answer why eradicating it overcomes cyclic existence? Okay? All right, so here's the first one. Again, this is from Guy's book, Introduction to Emptiness. The ignorance that is at the root of suffering conceives of things as having their own way of existing without depending on being posited through the force of consciousness. To have such a way of existing is to have intrinsic nature. What does that answer? Well, I thought it answered how ignorance is the root of cyclic existence.
Answers, tells us what it is.
Okay. I'll accept that too. Okay, here's the next one. The path to freedom is the path of abandoning ignorance by refuting the reified nature, essence, or self that ignorance superimposes. What does that answer? Right. Yeah. All of them. Okay. Now we're going to flip over to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When we're shrouded in ignorance, things appear to have objective existence. If you sit and look at things, they seem to be there. Now this is His Holiness talking. When I look at you, you seem to be there. When you look at me, there seems to be a Buddhist monk here. It seems as if there is a person, a solid entity here. And yet if you seek for that person, you can't find it. You can see the body of a Buddhist monk. When I speak to you, you can hear my voice. Perceiving the actions of my body and speech, you have some idea of what's going on in my mind. Yet, when you look for the Dalai Lama under analysis, you can't find him. It seems as if there's a solid entity there, but everyone is a mere designation on the basis of body and mind. Everyone agrees? How? That's what I thought. Okay.
Edging towards why, but not fully.
Okay. Here's the next part. Whether internal or external, nothing exists in the solid way it appears. We objectify and reify the slightest thing. A wrong conception, a wrong mentation takes place. However, love and compassion arise not on the basis of such inappropriate thinking, but on the basis of appropriate thinking. By thinking of the suffering of sentient beings, generating an aspiration to enlightenment, a wish to become a Buddha for their benefit, we counter our self-cherishing attitude. Okay. I'm going to continue now with Venerable Chudran. So if we could only understand ignorance, we might not be so ignorant. I didn't make that up. But I'm also seeing the lid starting to close in here again. Part of the whole view of ignorance is that we don't realize it even exists. We think that we're pretty much on top of our situation. We understand things pretty well. One way to look at it is that it's like a general obscuration, a general dimness or darkness in the mind. Then within that dimness, we grasp at things as being inherently existent. So one way of looking at ignorance is that it's like a fog. Okay? Another way to look at ignorance is to look at it as the actual grasping itself. Here is where we get the term self-grasping ignorance, concept of self, conception of true existence, and grasping at true existence. These different terms all fall under ignorance. Another way to talk about ignorance is to talk about ignorance that does not understand suchness or emptiness. We don't understand the ultimate truth, emptiness, the deeper way things exist. How? Another way of looking at ignorance is to talk about the ignorance that does not understand conventional things like cause and effect. And then there's also a lot of misconceptions about cause and effect in the path to enlightenment. We have both of these forms of ignorance. Okay, now I'm going to go to Precious Garland. This is verse 35. And if you've got another verse or verses, please, after I read a bit of this, please wave your hand. So verse 35 reads, as long as one grasps the aggregates, one will also grasp the I with regard to them. And if one grasps the I, karma will be created again. And due to that karma, one will again be reborn. So the self-grasping of persons, specifically the I grasping at our own I, and the self-grasping of phenomena, are both the root of cyclic existence. And then the commentary on this verse goes into, I'll read a bit of this. The teaching on the 12 links of dependent origination describes how we enter and leave cyclic existence. Each set of 12 links involves a new lifetime in cyclic existence. Self-grasping ignorance is the starting point for all that follows in one set of 12. Due to the ignorance that grasps the I as truly existent, attachment arises for what we find attractive and gives us pleasure, and anger arises for whatever we find disagreeable and disturbs our happiness. Motivated by these and other afflictive emotions, we then create karma, which leaves seeds or potentialities on our mind stream. When craving and clinging arise at the time of death, they activate these karmic seeds, which then propel a new rebirth. In that new rebirth, self-grasping again generates afflictions, which again create karma, that again propel more rebirths in cyclic existence. And there's more about that. So I'll just read this part. To overcome self-grasping, the wisdom directly realizing emptiness needs to be very firm and able to stay on its object for long periods of time. Did someone find other verses that answer this? Okay. Moving on then. Okay, these next ones will go a bit more quickly. Maybe I'll ask you to answer this one first, rather than my thing. So what's the meaning of conceived object, and what is the conceived object of ignorance? Who'd like to do this one? Okay, maybe you didn't know I was going to go this far. Let's assume that. All right. So the conceived object is the main object with which a conceptual consciousness is concerned. For conceptual consciousnesses, it is the same as the apprehended object. The conceived object of the self-grasping of aggregates is the aggregates being truly existent, and the conceived object of the I grasping is the I being truly existent. Then Venerable Children says it in another way, just sort of flips this whole thing around. The truly existent object which appears to ignorance, and which the latter grasps or conceives as existing, is the conceived object. The truly existent object which appears to ignorance, and which the latter grasps or conceives as existing, is the conceived object. So then I went to verse 175 in Precious Garland, and I love this part, and it actually answers this question by giving us all this other stuff, which unbelievably is the answer to the question, how do I know I can become a Buddha? So then you go back to the four truths of the Noble Ones. So how do I know true cessations and paths exist? To know if true cessations and true paths exist, they're posited in relationship to the first two truths, true dukkha and true origin of dukkha. So we know that true dukkha exists. There's no question about that. Then, true origin of dukkha, gaining some conviction that self-grasping ignorance is the root of samsara, and that it is possible to eliminate it. And why is it possible to eliminate it? Because the conceived object of that ignorance does not exist. What is the conceived object of ignorance? Inherent existence. So then to know that conceived object of ignorance does not exist, you have to have some understanding of emptiness, specifically the correct inferential that does not go to the extreme of absolutism or nihilism. Because if you go to either of those two extremes, you have not realized that the inherent existence that the ignorance grasps does not exist. So to really have the confidence that liberation is possible, we have to have the confidence that true cessation is possible, which means that there is a path to true cessation, that is possible, which means that the path is capable of overcoming the true origin, the self-grasping ignorance. And what does that grasp? Inherent existence. So what do we have to know that inherent existence does not exist? Emptiness. And when we know that inherent existence does not exist, then we know that ignorance can be eliminated. Then we know there is a path to eliminate it. There is the resultant true cessation, so that it's possible to become liberated. How brilliant is that? So I can read the words. Did you want to?
There's another section here.
Great. Get it really close, Monroe.
Since you had gone back to verse 35, there's also a nice explanation in Precious Garland, just after the part that you had read about identifying the root of cyclic existence. It says, the conceived object of the self-grasping of the aggregates is the true existence of the aggregates. And the conceived object of the I grasping is the true existence of the I. To realize the selflessness of persons, we do not have to first realize that the conceived object To realize the selflessness of persons, we do not have to first realize, that's the key, that the conceived object of the self-grasping of the aggregates is non-existence. If that were the case, we would have to realize that the aggregates are not truly existent, and therefore we'd have realized the selflessness of phenomena before realizing the selflessness of the person. Remember that whole conversation? Which one do you realize first?
Yeah, I actually had that in here and I took it out. Yeah. Great. Thank you. All right. Shall we move on to number 4? Or number 5, actually. So what is the meaning of seeing things as illusion-like? Are things illusion? Why or why not? All right, well, I first of all found something in verse 109 in Precious Garland. Such is the profound Dharma that is obscure to ordinary beings, that the world is like an illusion, is the ambrosia of the Buddha's teaching. So the commentary goes on to say that samsara and nirvana are without inherent existence, is the profound dharma that is obscured ordinary beings. Those sentient beings whose self-grasping ignorance is strong and who are extremely attached to things existing as they appear cannot understand this profound teaching. While they ask the Buddha questions such as, is the self permanent, impermanent, both, or neither, underlying their question is the assumption that the self exists inherently. In fact, there is no truly existent self or truly existent world. The world and the sentient beings in it are like magical illusions, in that their appearance is false. They appear truly existent, but do not exist in that way in the least. They are empty of true existence. Sentient beings whose self-grasping is strong and who are attached to the appearance of true existence can't even imagine their actual mode of existence, let alone comprehend it. If the Buddha tried to explain to them this Dharma, that is the nectar of the Buddha's teachings, they would reject it, and they would criticize the Buddha Dharma. For this reason, the Buddha did not share this ambrosia of immortality, the teaching that leads to the deathless state of nirvana, with them. So then we get into this other stuff that we enjoy hearing about. The magician is affected in that real horses and elephants appear to him, but he knows they are illusions and thus does not grasp them as real. He does not misapprehend them like the audience does, but understands they're empty of being, real horses and elephants. Similarly, ordinary beings who have not realized emptiness conceptually through a valid inference, and Aryas in post-meditation time have the experience of true existence, but they know it's false and they don't grasp at phenomena as truly existent. Let's see. I think I'm going to skip down to something that Geshe Kensur Jampatekshak says in Insight to Emptiness about this. He says this: similarly, sentient beings who have not realized emptiness have both the appearance of inherent existence and the grasping at inherent existence. They accept that appearance as true, just like the small children accept the appearance of another child in the mirror as true. However, when Aryas encounter objects in their daily lives, while they are not in meditative equipoise on emptiness, although those things appear inherently existent, they do not believe that appearance. They know it's false, and that things do not exist from their own side. Thus, they do not grasp at inherent existence, and instead they see things as existing like illusions. And what does that mean? They appear one way, as inherently existent, but they exist in another way, as empty of inherent existence. And then further on in Precious Garland, if phenomena don't exist in any of these four ways, existent, non-existent, and so forth, how do they exist? They exist like illusions. They are not illusions, but they are similar to illusions in the fact that they appear to exist one way, but actually exist in another. Things appear to exist inherently, but in fact are empty of inherent existence and exist dependently. They exist by being merely designated by name, merely fabricated by conception. Did anyone find another passage that addresses this in Precious Garland or somewhere else? Okay, we're going to move on then. Question 6. What is the difference between being an illusion and being like an illusion? So first of all, the term illusion refers to something that's intended to deceive the senses or mislead perception. So I want to go off on a tangent for a minute, because Venerable Children gets to do this every now and then. So I'm going to go off and tell you a story. In 1987, I went on a camping trip for 5 weeks with a friend. I think that cured me of camping. But anyway, We traveled from Edmonton right to the west coast of British Columbia, and on the way over, I visited my sister who was living in this very obscure place with her husband, and she was pregnant with her first child. That's why I know it was 87. And then we got on this ferry that took us from Prince Rupert down to the tip of Vancouver Island. And I'd been to the west side of Vancouver Island, but I'd never been down the east side. So in 1987, actually, the top end of Vancouver Island was still remote. It was really inhabited by very few people. There were a lot of North American Indian people, and now I know I'm going to get into trouble right there because that label is always changing. I don't know right now what's politically correct. I've heard that people like to call themselves Indians in Canada, so forgive me if I've blown it. But anyway, we're starting to travel down the east side of Vancouver Island. It was just stunning and very raw and rough. And there's this place that we knew about called Alert Bay. So we had to take a little tiny ferry from this northern part of the island to Alert Bay. And this place is entirely inhabited by North American Indian people. And amazingly, I don't know how many people were living there at the time, but they had this magnificent museum. It was small, but it was magnificent. And it was dedicated to the return of these potlatch items that were taken away from this community a very long time ago by well-meaning religious people who thought they were just dooming themselves to hell by having these great big parties. So the potlatch is where tribes of people would get together. On the west coast, they were very affluent. You know, they had the ocean right there, and they had, you know, they were just very affluent. And one way they celebrated was holding these parties for weddings or funerals or no reason. And the chief of the tribe would, you know, hold these feasts and give away many, many, many gifts. And the person would exhibit their, you know, power and generosity through this gift giving. So when the missionaries saw this, and then it was accompanied by dancing and wearing incredibly beautiful wooden masks. So when the missionaries saw this and the other religious people, they thought it was horrendous and that they're doing, you know, harm to themselves. And then eventually all of their rituals, like these masks, were taken away and taken to museums in Europe and in New York. And they just shut it down. And then something happened over time where gradually, they got the masks back. Thus, this museum. So this is 1987. So the exhibit was there, and then there was a place where you could sit and watch this hologram. And I don't know if I have the right word. A movie that's a hologram? Is that right? So anyway, it's in 1987. This is not, you know, not too sophisticated. But a few of us are sitting watching. They lowered the lights, and you start off by hearing someone coughing and a chair scraping, and then out of the darkness appears this Aboriginal man, this Indian man. And so you know it's just lights, and he starts telling the story about their tribe and how the potlatch was done. So I knew I was looking at lights, but I could tell that I was getting drawn into just assuming things about this person. He was very attractive. I started making up stories in my mind about his family and about what age he was and the things he'd done in the tribe on the island. It was amazing to watch my mind do this, knowing I was looking at, and it, you know, it was a three-dimensional thing, but it was just lights, and my mind was going crazy about this illusion. Astounding. So that's my story. It's just so weird. And then Venerable Children goes on to talk about illusions in this way. We all know this one. So she says, when we fall in love with someone, we create this illusion. The person is perfect. Do you remember? The person is perfect. I remember. It's just magnificence in the flesh. And so we have to be with this person all the time. And when we're not, we're unhappy. And we crave the person. And we grow lovesick, and we miss them when we're not with them. And then we start spending more time with the person. And we start to see they're not perfect. And we start actually seeing through our illusion of attachment. And we become unhappy. But I'm going to argue with this one. I don't think I ever knew it was an illusion. I thought they changed. For sure they changed. And then we start focusing on all the bad things about the person. You know, they smell bad, they put their socks everywhere, they don't do this, they don't do that. Unhappy. And then we start to push them away and we start to fall out of love. And she says, but we do not realize that we are suffering from attachment, and yet we haven't seen all the way through the illusion. I never saw my way at all. No way. So that's another way of thinking about illusion. So, Precious Garland, verse 100. If phenomena don't exist in any of the four ways, existent, non-existent, how do they exist? You just heard this. They exist like illusions. They're not illusions, but they're similar to illusions in that they appear to exist one way, but exist in another. Things appear to exist inherently, but in fact they're empty of inherent existence and exist dependently. They exist by being merely designated by name, merely fabricated by conception. Okay, are you hanging in there? I want to read some things about illusion. There's just 3 books here. You have to hear this, because I love it. Okay, this is from Jeffrey's book, Cultivating Compassion. This is a great example of more about an illusion. An illusion created by a magician is another common example of a false appearance. In India, there are magicians who work with a rope and a boy. One was brought to the United States, and a film made of this act in a laboratory. The rope magically uncoiled and went up into space, and the boy climbed to the top of the rope. It wasn't hanging from anything. All the doctors in the room saw was the boy climbing the rope. But the camera saw the boy standing next to a man with a coiled rope. The magician had the power to affect the spectator's eye consciousness so that they saw the boy climb the rope even though he didn't. Buddhists describe the magician as using the power of mantra to cast a spell on the eyes of all present. Everyone sees the boy climb the rope. The magician sees the boy climb the rope too, but he doesn't believe the appearance at all. He knows that the boy is standing next to him and that the rope is coiled on the floor. He sees the illusion vividly, just as vividly as the others. The others believe it, but he does not. Okay, now, this is magnificent. How to see yourself as you really are by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So, chapter 19 is called Viewing Yourself as Like an Illusion, and it starts off with a verse from Guntang. So we know that Jeffrey's involved with this. Like a magician's illusions, dreams, and a moon reflected in water, all beings and their environments are empty of inherent existence. Though not solidly existent, all these appear like water bubbles coming forth in water. So now His Holiness says, as a result of your having investigated the nature of I and other phenomena, you now know that they appear to exist inherently, but you understand that they are empty of inherent existence, just as an illusion conjured up by a magician does not exist in the way it seems. As Nagarjuna says in his precious Garland of advice, here's verse 52. A form seen from the distance is seen clearly by those nearby. If a mirage were water, why is water not seen by those nearby? The wording is actually a little bit different than the one in our text. Verse 53. The way this world is seen as real by those afar is not so seen by those nearby, for whom it is insubstantial, like a mirage. It is not that phenomena are illusions, rather they are like illusions. Even if a mirror image of your face is not really your face, the reflection is not utterly non-existent. Through its appearance, you can understand how your actual face looks. Similarly, although persons and things are empty of existing the way they appear to be established in their own right, they are not utterly non-existent. They can act and can be experienced. Therefore, being like an illusion is not the same as appearing to exist, but actually not existing, like the horns of a rabbit, which do not exist at all. So I'm going to, in the light of time, I'm just going to read one more section here. So this is chapter 19. The whole thing is worth reading again and again and meditating on. And here His Holiness talks about how seeing this way helps us. Seeing people and things as existing like illusions helps reduce unfavorable emotions because lust, hatred, and so forth stem from our superimposing qualities, good or bad, on phenomena beyond what they actually have. For instance, when we get very angry at someone, we have a strong sense of the wretchedness of that person. But later, when we calm down and look at that same person, we may find our earlier perception laughable. The benefit of insight is that it prevents us from attributing to objects a goodness or badness beyond what is actually there. This undermining of self-deception makes it possible to reduce and eventually end lust and hatred, since these emotions are built on exaggerations. This elimination of unhealthy emotions in turn leaves more room for healthy emotions and virtues to develop. By viewing phenomena with insight, you bring them within the scope of the practice of emptiness. There's something in Emptiness Yoga. I'm going to let you look for it. I can see that people here are fading. So we're going to finish up with question 7, because I think it wouldn't make sense not to do 7 in light of what everything else came before this. So, question 7 is, what does it mean that things exist by mere name? What does it mean that they exist conventionally? So actually, we've actually covered the second part of the question. But I'm going to give you something from Geshe Jampa Tegchok, again, insight into emptiness. And he says this: although all phenomena cannot be found under ultimate analysis, they still exist on the conventional level. How do they exist? By being merely labeled in dependence on their basis of designation. According to the Prasangika system, everything is mere name. Does that mean that only names exist? Does that mean that when I touch the table, I'm touching a name? No. Thinking that apart from the name, nothing exists is the extreme of nihilism. Following this wrong view, we could think that karma is just a word, and there's no such thing as karma, and thus conclude that therefore there's no need to observe the law of karma and its effects. Saying that everything is mere name means that everything is named on its basis of designation. Mere negates its inherent existence. It negates phenomena existing from their own side. Things exist by being merely named, imputed, designated, or labeled in dependence on their respective basis of imputation. They do not exist inherently. They come into existence by being merely labeled by name and concept. Thus, saying that things exist by mere name is not negating their conventional existence. Things do exist conventionally. Mere only negates the possibility of existing inherently and existing from their own side, without needing to be labeled independent of name and concept. And then very briefly, some of the commentary from Precious Garland, verse 99. Saying that objects are mere names does not mean that they are words or sounds. If a tree were a sound, it couldn't grow leaves. Rather, saying things are mere names means that they exist by being merely conceptually fabricated or conceptually designated. Okay. So to finish this, unless someone has something else, I'm going to read this to you first. It will just put the icing on the cake here. So talking about mere name. This is from Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book called How Things Exist. Only he can say it like this, actually. The merely labeled I is born from merely labeled parents and goes to a merely labeled school to get a merely labeled education from a merely labeled teacher to get a merely labeled degree, and then get a merely labeled job as a merely labeled professor, then marries a merely labeled wife or husband and has a merely labeled child. With merely labeled money, the merely labeled I goes to the merely labeled shop and buys merely labeled things. The merely labeled I wears merely labeled clothes and eats merely labeled food. It is like this from birth to death. From the merely labeled birth to the merely labeled death. The whole thing beginning with birth and ending with death. And everything in between is merely labeled. This is how it is in reality. Did anyone find any other verses for this question? Okay, we did it.
Page 7.
Oh, in this book? Page 102. So we're going to merely dedicate the merely labeled quiz.